Hey YouTube, what is up? Kyo here coming at you with a brand new YouTube video. And this YouTube video is going to be a little bit special. We have a Protoss versus Protoss, and it's between me and one of my top 16 GM Protoss friends. And this is going to be a fun little series that we did to show you guys if one base Protoss still exists in Legacy of the Void, whether or not you should be worried about one base timings in Protoss versus Protoss, the effects of going one base, and really what it's like to defend against it as the person who maybe wants to macro in the matchup. So this will be a little bit different in that we are going to not only be looking at this first replay, but my friend and I also did a couple game recoveries, and we'll jump out of this game and into another one. And we have a total of 3 different replay variations from these positions on Catalina. So it'll give you guys a pretty diverse set of expectations and different builds that you can expect to see in Legacy of the Void. We were really wondering with the new economy if, as David Kim puts it, if people are expected to be expanding, or rather if one person just staying on one base for a longer amount of time just means that if you are to build a Nexus, you are just 400 minerals behind and you're going to mine out. So you really wanted to see if you could still one base Protoss, because there are quite a few builds, if you know, in Heart of the Swarm. There's 3 gate Stargate off one base, just 10 gate 3 gate, 2 gas 3 gate, and you can do 4 gate Blink, the late Robotics, Dark Templar. There's all kinds of builds you can do in Protoss versus Protoss and Heart of the Swarm that really are just pretty all in. And we wanted to see how the no all in theory holds up here in Legacy of the Void mod, see if it's something that will transition over to this matchup, or if really for some of the players out there, they might know that Protoss versus Protoss is actually a pretty frustrating matchup. I would have to say that it's either the most frustrating, or maybe Zerg versus Zerg, some people say, is maybe the most frustrating. Sometimes in Protoss versus Protoss, there's not really a way to come back in the matchup. If you lose some of your core army units, there's not really a way to fight back into the game, mainly not only because it's a mirror matchup, but a lot of units have bonuses against the same type of units. So Stalkers do bonus damage to Stalkers. So if you lose a set of Stalkers and someone else is going Blink, there's not really much you can do. So the first thing we're starting to notice here is that our barcode friend, top 16 GM friend, is moving out on the map already, 4 minutes. So this is about a minute earlier than usual, and his warp gate's almost finished, so it's almost a full minute faster. And I see he loses a probe there. We'll see some different variations where that doesn't happen, but most importantly, we can see that he keeps his core units alive, so it's actually not really that big of a deal since he doesn't have warp gate done yet. And in my base, we see that we're just doing a 3-gate robotics, and we're building immortals. So the first thing I wanted to test out was the Immortal Hardened Shield. Now, there was a guy in one of my other videos talking about how immortals were like too good versus mech or something, so they had to be like super nerfed or something. I can address that later, but for the meantime, I basically just want to get out these immortals, see how their hardened shields do in the Protoss versus Protoss matchup. You can see that his push is now coming across the map, and we have a proxy pylon out on the map. We also see that I am in fact getting a robotics bay. First immortal is out, 6 minutes, and we see he has a rather large army in terms of army value. We're actually quite behind. And that's because, let's see a Zealot doing pressure down here, but because you have so many minerals now, you can afford 4 gates and still get really early warp gate pushes. Now we see that by the time he actually feels confident enough to push up this ramp though, I do have a 4-ton overcharge, I mean, and we are working on some other immortals here. And the good thing about this build, as I said, is not only does he have 4 gates, but he also has enough money for a robotics. So you're not all in to the point where you can't afford detection against Dark Templar. See here that we have 2 Immortals out. And we're using that Hardened Shield ability to get some really good damage on some Immortals, or on rather some Stalkers. We have a Disruptor also on the way. You can see here the main engagement's just about to happen. There is a Disruptor out just in time for the Nexus Cannon, and you can see how much damage that does to his main army. Second Nexus Cannon is ready, and we're still warping in a lot of units. Disruptor's almost ready to be used again. You can see our Immortal with its new Hardened Shield ability doing some good damage versus this 4-gate. And I didn't really show it so much, but I had a couple Zealots come over here. First one I kind of showed a little bit. I think I did a little bit of damage. 6 workers killed total. But the really big thing here is that Immortals still do help you enough to hold against pushes like this. And actually you have enough time to get out of the Disruptor. So depending on what you scout here, if it's just a 4-gate with the robotics, kind of all in off 1 base, then it's really easy, I think, to hold 1 base non-tech builds and non-transition builds. But in the next game, after we decided that it's not really something you can do to just stay on gateways, we were like, okay, well, what other kind of 1 base pushes can you do? So we wanted to see how just Disruptors would hold against different variations of the same build. And we're going to go ahead and skip to about 5:15, I think was around that time. And so we wanted to see how Disruptors did against 1 base Protoss. If you can skip the Immortals, just go Disruptors. And the point of that would be, because you've invested so much gas into Disruptors, not only can you go to Warp Prism and harass with them later, but also if the Protoss player goes for something like Charge Lot Immortal Archon, which is a very standard builds in Heart of the Swarm right now, you would have a very good unit to counter that army composition. So here we go on the second replay of this, and this time his probe does not die, and he is pushing with his 4 gates and robotics again. So we're going to see what happens when we just go just Disruptors versus his build. So we have a little bit more gas, and this time we're going to have 4 gateways defending, because we're going to be building more Zealots. So that way we have more gas to build our Disruptors. So again, this is just a 4-gate push. It would be just like a 3-gate push, but now because you have more minerals, as we stated earlier, you can afford the extra gateway and robotics as the attacking player. So there's our Nexus Cannon buying a little bit of time, and we start our first Disruptor here. Getting that out before we get supply block, so not too big of a difference on our intended build here. And again, we get our Zealots in his base, do a little bit of counter damage. Always as the defending player, this proxy pylon is incredibly important. If you don't get the proxy pylon down and you're trying to defend, you're going to have a really tough time trying to do really anything, because you want them to be warping in units at home instead of at your base. There we go with our Disruptor. And the good thing about this is with the Disruptor speed, you can see that it gets in there and can get out before really any units can target it down, and it's faster than Stalkers. We have a second Disruptor on the way. And our Disruptor is already ready to go back with its damage. You see a little bit of splitting there. Kind of hard to split without Blink. Moving in some more Zealots. Disruptors do take a little bit of time to build here though. 60 seconds, same as a Tempest now. The Legacy of the Void patch mod. And now we have 2 Disruptors coming in here. Do keep in mind that Disruptors have really terrible damage AoE on friendly units. I don't think they hit other disruptors, but I think they do hit every other unit. Especially probes. I've noticed they do hit probes. So keep them out of your own probe lines. Good advice. And so here we come back in with the disruptors. And doing some pretty sick damage there. And there's GG in the second game. So it does look like if you scout, again, like I said with the Zealots, you go in here, do some damage, check out which buildings they have. If you see they have a robotics, then you can just build disruptors and you can hold a 4-gate, 1-base push rather easily. So at this point we decided that it's not really something that'll happen anymore. We don't think people are going to go for simple 4 or what would have been 3-gate pushes anymore in Legacy of the Void. It just, by the time you get here, the defending player can have not only tech, but 4 gateways, and of course, as always, the defending player should be counterattacking. So we figured, okay, well, if we can't do just gateway early pushes with Chrono Boost, how would 1-base blink pushes work? Are they as really kind of all-around good as they are in Heart of the Swarm? It's kind of common to see blink pushes maybe into Immortals, into an Expo, into standard mid-game Protoss versus Protoss gameplay, something like Mortal Archon, as I mentioned earlier, or just the standard Colossus, or even sometimes Tempest we see. So we wanted to figure out how blink is going to work versus things like disruptors, because as we just saw, if you can just rush disruptors, then can you rush disruptors to defend against something like blink? And so the key question here is what builds do work and don't work versus 1-base Protoss players. So in this build, or this game rather, we're going to be seeing a really big, huge blink attack from the attacking barcode Protoss on the bottom. And this time he already has blink, 7 minutes, and his blink attack is coming across the map. You can see I am building my second disruptor at this point in the game. We have 3 gateways, and we have a lot of zealots, as I mentioned earlier, because we need the gas. And look at all these stalkers. So that's probably something worth mentioning already. If we look at the units tab, we have almost the same number of total units here, but in terms of raw damage, blink and 13 stalkers versus zealots is something you never want as a defending Protoss player, mainly just because not only is it already easy to kite zealots with stalkers, but now if you have blink, essentially your stalkers should never drop below their shield damage, should never take hull damage. And so here we go with our disruptor, and we can see that disruptors are going to have a pretty hard time hitting stalkers. Second disruptor coming in, and again, blink timing, cooldown, only 10 seconds, and of course, the disruptor recharge time is 30 seconds. So, already we can tell that defending blink is going to be a really big problem. So the question is, do you go in with one, and then try and move your second one after it? Try and get them as they blink? But as you can already see that if they blink away once, you're actually really far away from your other disruptor with the one that's moving slow, because that movement speed is a really big bonus. And here we see that as you try and retreat with your blinks or your disruptors, it's obviously very easy for blink stalkers to pick them off. So at this point, it just becomes a battle of hoping the blinking player miss micros or something like that. I mean, it's not really viable, as you can see, to be building disruptors to defend against blink pushes. You have just slow zealots and disruptors, basically, to defend against all these stalkers. And we have all these minerals because there's not really anything to spend it on. I mean, we have zealots, but zealots are rather cheap, even off 4 gateways. You have to keep in mind, disruptors only cost 100 minerals. So here we get some good disruptor shots finally as we start taking out this pylon at the top. Have our third disruptor. Getting another good shot on these stalkers. It is kind of important to mention that disruptors do great damage versus stalkers, but stalkers by themselves do not really do good damage versus disruptors. They are light units, not armored. So you have to keep that in mind as a stalker player. They don't really do too much damage against disruptors. So here we see an amazing disruptor hit. But realistically speaking, now that all my disruptors are dead, it's okay for him to trade because he has blink stalkers versus essentially nothing. I have just zealots, and trading disruptors, which are 300 gas units, for all these stalkers is not something that is very cost efficient. You can see that although my resources lost and money is a little bit higher, that there's not really a way to deal with the stalkers themselves. You can just keep warping in stalkers. The only thing that may come a factor here is mining out your main. He did mention that he mines out, and I mean after that it's just microing your blink stalkers. But basically what we found out is that if someone goes for a one base blink stalker push and you try and mech out of it, it is not, so you do not want to be on disruptors really. You want to try as best as you can to either do something like Stargate or go for a Dark Templar counterattack. And the reason for this is because if you do go for Immortals like we saw in the first game, where it would be a better choice to defend against these stalkers, even though you have better units to defend, it is still something you have to keep in mind that the blink stalker player can just build a few sentries at the bottom of your ramp and contain you. Moving down this ramp with Immortals, even if they can use their invincibility shield or whatever that thing is, does not really help you if you can't move down the ramp. So basically we came to the conclusion that if you want to do one base Protoss, as an attacking player, Blink is a very strong option still. However, robotics is not really the ideal thing you want to get by itself. Maybe you want to go something like Stargate and robotics, so you get a couple Immortals to defend, maybe one or two, and then for the rest you just get Oracles to counterattack. You will be able to counterattack more times than they can Nexus Cannon. And as you can see here, he told me he expoed, so I just went ahead and left the game. But yeah, so you want to keep in mind that you have to do some kind of counterattacking here. You can't just sit on disruptors and try and have a micro battle, because as cool as that is, unless you're in like, I don't know, some league where people who go Blink don't use Blink. I'm not sure if that league exists. At least it's probably not one that is relevant to people watching. Then I think you definitely need to go for something like Immortals and a Stargate, or DTs. And the reason I say DTs is because unless you go for a robotics build, this is actually kind of important for people who don't really keep up on the Legacy of the Void changes. Unless you do go robotics and build observers, your oracles for vision are not nearly as strong as they used to be. And the reason for that is because the Revelation and Envision, I think, were the two names of the abilities. Basically, the spell that let you see the enemy units for a duration of time, and the skill that lets you see cloaked units are now combined. And this is actually terrible, like, actually kind of horrendous for the Protoss versus Protoss matchup. And I actually think it's kind of bad for the Protoss versus Terran matchup as well, because if you open up with Oracles, you can only really envision, or rather use detection on one unit. And that's because when you cast the spell, it only really detects the units that you cast the spell on. So you can cast the spell on one DT and you reveal it for, I think, 45 seconds, 30 seconds, or a minute. I don't really remember the times. So that's great. You can deal with one DT, but then as soon as a second DT is warped in, all of a sudden your Oracle becomes rather useless for defense. And the way it worked in the old patch and part of the Swarm was actually really nice, because generally it can be said that if you have a little bit of extra energy on your Oracle, you can keep up detection even if you want Stargate Opener. But now, basically, like I said, you can only detect one DT, and then after that, unless you have a second Oracle, which has already saved up 25 additional energy from the initial build, from when it comes out, then you cannot detect again. So it's very important that you go something like Stargate and Robotics. And as the attacking player, I think it's almost always going to be the case where you're going to be going Twilight, Forgate, and then maybe even a Robotics while taking an Expo. As we saw in this game, we were just testing out one-base builds, but I definitely think it will be very common for people to do something like 3 or 4 gate Blink and Robotics into an Expo, and then either the defending player will do something like Stargate Robotics, or they will do Stargate Blink themselves. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and this gave you some ideas for how Protoss versus Protoss will be in Legacy of the Void. I'm still not really sure how I feel about it. I'll probably have to play quite a few more games. But at least the general idea is that kind of silly one-base builds won't be as existent in Legacy of the Void. So at least that's good. You can get some nice 2-base plays coming in, and as the saying goes, the more you macro, the more often the better player will have chances to win the game. So I hope that's good news for all of you guys, and I guess I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace, and thanks for watching.